Thanks everybody for coming back once again. Thank you to Jeff David for organizing, bringing our emergency services group in tonight. For those of you new to tonight, this is our comprehensive plan committee. We've been going through some education portions. We reviewed our 2010 comp plan, and now we've been bringing in some outside groups to share. And one of the items the group wanted to hear from was emergency services, and see as the town continues to build out what impacts you're seeing, what are the needs of fire and ambulance. And Jeff, I know you said you'll jump in for ambulance. Thank you for that. And Daniel, if you have comments to share. I know Riordan isn't going to be able to make it tonight, but wanted to give you guys, it's an open conversation with the group. We're not looking for a formal presentation, but just discussion. So as we look to 2020, is kind of the wrap up of this, but we're looking for what the next 10 years out is. So, it's the task of this committee to kind of project, what does development look like? What is that impact on emergency services? What impacts on the school district? So we're kind of trying to bring all groups in and share your expertise and knowledge that obviously, we don't have, and provide this group with some information so that we can make projections as we kind of look ahead and help the town board with what the vision of the town is going to be for the next 10 years out. So Zach's working the computer. We've kind of pulled up and have mapping of what the fire districts are to kind of talk to that point. We've got mapping of where the different fire buildings are, to kind of help orient as we get into discussions. And then I know ambulance services has their own questions, concerns with that. So so with that, Jeff, I don't know if you want to kind of do any intro on your end, or at least to kind of kick off from the fire marshal standpoint, and then we can kind of jump in whether round table or each person kind of wants to introduce themselves and then share a little bit about what area you serve and kind of what needs you're seeing and everything else. I think would be helpful.
So yeah, as Mark said, I'm Jeffrey David, I'm the fire marshal here for the town of Penfield. Just kind of my primary responsibilities for the town are overall fire safety and enforcement of the fire code throughout the entire town of Penfield. So my jurisdiction is on the map there. You're going to see the entire town of Penfield. Then the fire districts are broken up a little bit within the town. That's something different. Those are the emergency responders. They're the ones that are going to respond first to an emergency, and then if it's something that needs the attention of a code official or a building inspector or something like that, they contact me. I'm their point of contact for the building department, for code enforcement, for all that. So I come out and I'll do inspections of buildings. If they've been impacted by vehicles, water, weather, fire, anything like that. Other than that, primarily our responsibilities are doing inspections of existing commercial buildings. New York state law requires that we do inspections depending on the type of occupancy, certain frequencies, either annually or every 3 years, or I should say no less frequent than 3 years, so we could do them a little more if we wanted to. Right now, the last I calculated, we have roughly 800 businesses in the town of Penfield. Every single one of those needs to be inspected no less frequent than 3 years, some of them much more frequent than that. So it is a bit of a handful right now, but we're managing and we're getting it done. So that's just an overview. Other than that, new buildings, we look at, the fire marshal's office looks at new buildings as well. Any new construction coming out. Not too much residential. If there's some features in a residential home, fireplaces, oddity features, sometimes a sprinkler system is required, something like that, we'll take a look at those. But we do look at all commercial plans. So any commercial building plans that come through, we'll take a look at. And then anything that goes through the planning process as well, site plans, those types of approvals, we'll take a look at those as well for fire access and whatnot. So on occasion, I will seek the help of the fire districts. Per the fire code, there are some times when the fire chief has to make a decision on something as well, and then that's when I will reach out to them. So kind of a good segue here. So to my right is Chief Finlayson with the Penfield Fire District, and then Brian Kelly, Assistant Fire Marshal with, or excuse me, Assistant Fire Chief with the West Webster Fire District. The Chief for Northeast Fire District was unable to make it, and then as Mark said earlier too, Dan Riordan from the ambulance was unable to make it, but we can kind of talk to those points as well. So I think I touched on everything there, Mark.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to kind of recap, what you do for the town and what our part is, and then I say we can kind of jump into the fire districts and kind of talk about, what kind of call volume you guys have, what do you deal with on a day-to-day basis, what do you see as, issues moving forward. Obviously, this group is not shy. We're kind of giving you the floor for a little bit, but they got no, concern jumping and asking questions. But we're just trying to get an understanding of, as we move ahead for the next 10 years, do you feel that your facilities meet your wants and needs? Do you see, as the town continues to expand well on into the future, where do we need to place ourselves, and making sure that we're providing the citizens of Penfield, the best, emergency services that we can.
So I'll start a little bit with that, with just kind of a note too. Between the 3 fire districts, there are actually 5 fire stations within the town of Penfield. There's 3 in the Penfield Fire District, 1 for West Webster, 1 for Northeast Joint. So they're spread out pretty well throughout the town. Obviously, as we go out further east, it's a lot more rural. Not a whole lot going on out there other than agricultural burns, things like that, farmers getting their fields and stuff ready for the season. So we're actually running into that a little bit right now. Typical for this time of year, not a big deal. So as far as Northeast Joint Fire District area, they're predominantly rural. They have 1 fire station there, kind of in the middle of their district in the town of Penfield. Like I said, predominantly rural, predominantly residential agricultural type parcels out there. So as for right now, they do not really respond to a whole lot of emergencies in that area. If they do, it's going to be more towards the Newbury Park, Milford Crossing area, and a little bit up there where he's got the cursor there too, the more dense areas. But as far as the rural areas, they really don't respond out there all that often. So I don't know the numbers for how many calls they'll do in that area, but I can tell you I do monitor all 3 fire districts. So if somebody does get a call within the town of Penfield, I am aware of it, and I can tell you that the Webster Fire Department does not respond to a whole lot within the town of Penfield.
Yeah, sure. Gary Finlayson, I'm chief, as Jeff said, of the Penfield Fire District. I'm responsible for the area you saw there in the yellow on the previous map for the Penfield Fire District. Responsible for the fire protection and coverage of that area. I work under 5 Board of Fire Commissioners that basically run the district, as you know, from our facilities and so forth, equipment and stuff like that. The Fire Commission is in charge of as far as properties and equipment that we maintain. We run about roughly 900, sometimes close to 1,000 calls a year for emergency services. That doesn't include our training drills and meetings and stuff like that. That strictly calls for service. It's been pretty steady over the past several years as far as the call volume. It fluctuates up and down just a little bit, but it's been fairly steady. We work closely with the fire marshal. Our big concern, one of the things that we need to have is whenever any kind of new buildings, subdivisions, commercial buildings, that we have our eyes on it to make sure that we have access for the sides of our apparatus. Certain fire protection systems are in place for protection, not just for the citizens but as well as the firefighters. So we kind of take a close look at that. I know we've had some areas that needed some modification and stuff, so we appreciate the fire marshal sharing that information with us. And like Jeff said, he does work with us and bring certain things to our attention that we either need to approve or make better. One of the things that we look at is the population in the town, how that affects the call volume, whether they're commercial building, residential. We are a volunteer fire department, so it's 100% volunteer. So our biggest struggle, as any fire department would be these days, is getting the volunteers in. With the call volume that we run, we're doing very good right now. But depending, as more commercial buildings come in, that could raise the amount of calls that way, not just residential. And we have our residential style type calls that we run on, but the commercial buildings bring in the alarms and some other things like that. So our biggest challenge is basically, keeping up with the call volume, keeping the volunteers. Like I said, right now we're doing a great job with it. But we all know that with today's day and age, everybody's working 2 jobs. They're just not as available as they were 10 or 20 years. I've been in 41 years, and I've seen a huge change in the fire service over those years as far as the availability goes. Like I said, we're doing great right now. Fortunately, we don't have to have any kind of paid staff on duty because that would really impact the taxpayers, but we're doing very good with volunteers right now. But that is one of the things that we have to keep an eye on as the years progress, and depending on the development and what goes on within the town, how that may affect you know, our volunteerism. We're hoping to keep that steady and keep that going. So, other than that, we don't really have any immediate needs. I know when we have storm conditions or things like that, we do rely on our highway department to help us out with some barricades or removing trees from roads and stuff like that in emergency situations. They've always been very good to work with, and I don't see that changing. But those are the types of services and needs that we rely on the town for. I don't think I have anything. Any questions? Or?
So Gary, you don't see any need over the next 10 years or so, or foreseeable future anyways, for any new facilities anywhere in the town?
The facilities we have right now have they're getting older. I don't know the exact age of the main station at the firehouse, which was renovated quite a few years ago. I think it may be 12 or 15 years. 20? Has it been that long? Time flies. Our Station 3 out east is adequate. Station 1 is adequate at this point. I don't see any major additions or changes that we may need. Our Station 2 on Qualtrough Road is basically on a small parcel there. Our district size as far as territory isn't going to change. That's going to remain the same. It's strictly going to be either population or whatnot, depending on, again, what the development is. Is it going to be a lot of senior living places, a lot of retail, commercial, whatever. But as far as facilities go, I mean, the district pretty much is in charge of all of that. Our 5 commissioners, our Board of Fire Commissioners. And I'm pretty sure, you know, we're set. The biggest thing we do is replace our apparatus on an ongoing basis. We have a 10-year replacement for most of our engines and a 15-year replacement for our ladders. So we're continually working on stuff like that. But as far as facilities, I don't see, you know, at this point where we're going to need anything of that nature in the immediate future.
So question, with the building of some of the mixed-use communities, does that change your need for what equipment you need?
It doesn't. We're rated by ISO insurance. It's an insurance adjusting, and it basically specifies based on the size of your district how much apparatus you need to have. Okay. So we're adequately covered, and I don't see that we would not ever be with the number of engines that we have and a couple of aerial ladders and our rescue truck, and you know,
so that doesn't.
It shouldn't impact that at all. No, we would still have the same amount of equipment.
When they go through the review process for those new projects, we do review it based on the equipment that is currently in service in the town. Okay. We make sure that those projects meet the needs of that apparatus.
The equipment that you currently have.
Correct.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
So.
Question for you: in your office, is it just you?
No, I'm the primary fire marshal. I have an assistant fire marshal.
The only reason I asked that is you came to my house when I did something and did the inspection.
Yeah.
And I knew you were the fire marshal, and the way you were talking about the number of buildings and things, I have no clue as to whether there's one of you or whether there's, you know, multiple people.
We also use Word for our office, or, you know.
Yeah, no.
How big your office is.
So I just have no idea how big.
Yeah, my office is part of the building department.
Okay.
So technically the director of the building department, Heidi Bell, she's also one of the fire marshals, although her duties are predominantly elsewhere, being the director of the department. I do have an assistant fire marshal as well, who does the majority of the existing building or existing business inspections. That's his primary responsibility. Okay. And then I'll do a lot of the individual permits for fireplaces, generators. I'll do all the new builds, things like that. Okay. So, and I'll help him out too with the roughly 800 businesses that we have, doing those inspections annually as well. So there's a couple of us. There's 2 of us right now.
Okay.
So.
Right there. You're right. Ryan Kelly, Assistant Fire Chief with the West Webster Fire District. We're structured similarly. You know, we're governed by a Board of Fire Commissioners. We cover about 25 square miles. We have 3 fire stations, one of which is in the Penfield town corner of State and Plank. We have approximately 100 volunteers that man our stations. The area at Penfield is essentially our box 300 with some minor variations. We run on average about 3,000 calls a year, 1,700, approximately 1,700 each year are EMS or ambulance based, and then the other 1,200 or 1,300 are rescue, fire rescue type calls. We also, I don't know what the term would be, dish out or mutual aid out an additional 500 to 800 calls a year to both Penfield Ambulance and Webster Ambulance. So, if you take all of the call volume that we would do in a year's time, it would be close to, 2,800 to 3,000 calls. Is that right? No, I'm sorry. 4,000. 4,000, yeah. No, 3,000. What did I say? 17, yeah. 4,
A lot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a lot, sorry. My math isn't working tonight. So with the volume that we do have 2 paid medics on during the day, and we have a paid medic on overnight. So what that does is it allows us to get ambulances out a little bit quicker. We do run 2 ambulances, so we do have that piece of it. Call volume in that area, I would attribute to probably a third of the call volume, roughly. It's a high commercial area for us. Along with residential, you can see the density there. From a station perspective or, capital perspective, all of our stations are fairly new. Station 3 being the oldest, built in 1986. Station 2 up in the north end was built in 2009. And we're just finishing a large capital improvement project at Station 1 on Gravel Road. So from that perspective, we're in pretty good shape. All stations have the capacity to house additional apparatus if needed. Station 1 was designed what I'll call for future needs in the event that we get further into career staffing. We've included necessary bunk areas and things like that. So we're kind of looking to the future. In case things like that happen. As the chief had mentioned, volunteerism is down. We were probably at our max of 125 members 2 to 3 years ago with a waiting list. We're down closer to about 100 right now. We do bring in additional, we've probably got a recruit class of, 8 individuals right now, and we've got a strong explorer base of about 25, so kids from 14 to seniors in high school that are interested in the fire service and EMS. So that program's been very good for us. From what I can tell, our portion of Penfield has been built out pretty well. I anticipate a little bit more growth, but we're in an area that's been built out quite a bit, and we've developed a good relationship with Jeff and Heidi in that we have a committee in-house that, when they get documents in for new builds in our area, we get it, we get to review it, we provide comments, not so much from a code or building perspective, but more so as it relates to fire apparatus placement, radiuses, and how we would look at it from a fire or rescue perspective. So it's been a good relationship with these guys on that. I'm not sure what else. From an apparatus perspective, just like the chief said, we have apparatus replacement schedules that we keep to pretty well. We're positioned pretty well. I think Jeff will probably allude to, EMS is probably a bigger topic in the town of Webster and in the areas that are encroaching into Penfield. So, we deal with that. There's a lot of things that could change in a few years. We just don't know. You got to come and wait and see how some of the regulatory stuff is moving along, and CONs and things like that. So.
You run ambulance out of that building as well?
We run 2 ambulances out of Station 1, which is at Gravel and Ridge Road.
But that services Penfield as well?
You're right. That services our portion of the district in Penfield. Yeah. Solely West Webster Fire District area.
Okay.
Do any of the other fire stations have ambulance service as well, or is that the only one?
That's the only one.
Yeah, Penfield has this whole separate ambulance service. All of our calls that we respond out are fire service type calls, not ambulance.
Yeah, Penfield Ambulance covers the ambulance service for all of the Penfield Fire District in the town of Penfield, and then the portions of the Northeast Joint that are in the town of Penfield as well.
Is that also volunteer only?
No, I guess we'll get into that now. Unfortunately, their operations manager wasn't able to make it tonight, but he's been sending me some information to relay to you guys, so I apologize for looking at my phone, but it is related. So they are currently expanding beyond their means. They currently have 6 ambulances, but only 4 bays in the current building. So they're looking at either expanding the building or a substation somewhere. That'll help with response times as well as, you know, better positioning, because right now they only have the one building right here on Jackson Road. So it is kind of a haul for them to get down to the Four Corners area from there. I mean, it is quite a bit of a drive. Even lights and sirens, I can tell you from experience, it's still several minutes. So so they're looking at expanding there. They have more ambulances than they have space in the building. They currently have, they do have mostly paid staff. They have some volunteer. I believe during the day, he didn't really tell me, but I think it's 3 crews.
Want me to speak? Yes.
Yeah, there was just a couple of points. One of the other things he said too was,
text me too.
yeah. So there's 2 crews on overnights, paid crews, which is 4 people, and they only have 3 bedrooms. So again, they've outgrown their building basically. So that's really all he sent me. So Dan, if you want to jump on that, go for it. But,
Sure. So currently, Penfield Ambulance takes over 4,000 calls a year. We have currently 5 ambulances, 4 bays, 5 ambulances. Our 6th one is on order. We're in the same kind of plan that the fire departments are. We rotate our vehicles based off of mileage, not so much years of service though. We put a lot of miles on our rigs in a very quick order of time. If you can you bring up the other map with the color code? Sure. That one right there. So you look at the Penfield Fire District and you look at the Four Corners and all the down the 441 corridor, a majority of our EMS calls tend to be down that way. And our base is located obviously on Jackson Road. You guys are well familiar with it, right across the street kind of. So we get a lot of our calls down that Route 441 and 250 and 441 5 Mile Line, all in that area. That's a lot of our primary response calls. So again, just like Jeff was talking about, expansion. He's absolutely right. During the day, we have 3 crews on duty, 2 ALS crews and a BLS crew.
What does
that mean?
What does the acronym mean?
2 full advanced life support ambulances with a paramedic
Okay.
and an EMT on board, and a basic life support rig with 2 EMTs on board. 7 days a week, we have 3 crews on, all day, all evening, all the way up to 2,300 hours, all the way till 11 o'clock. And during the overnight shifts, we have 2 crews on. We have usually 1 full ALS, or advanced life support rig, and 1 BLS, or basic life support ambulance as well, that we run from 2,300 to 0600. So our staffing, and you already talked about it, we've outgrown our base. We have 5 rigs, we can't even put them in our ambulance base, we only have 4 bays. We're over 4,000 calls. We've become an ALS agency or advanced life support agency where we didn't used to be just a couple years ago. We're SEQ, where a different agency used to provide their advanced life support via fly car and meet us on scene. And now we have become pretty much a self-sustaining entity as it is. And yeah, you said it best. We have 3 bedrooms. That's it. 4 bathrooms, 3 bedrooms, a small kitchen, a small crew quarter space. We have a boardroom and a meeting room that we use for public meetings like this or CPR training or classes, but we have definitely outgrown our space, and the majority of our calls tend to be, like you said, 5, 6, 7, 8 minute response time away from where we are.
So if a call comes in from the southwest area, are you still the closest to them? And if not, oh, you are. Okay. So like Fairport would still be farther away, Panorama or something. Okay.
So, I mean,
because I'm just thinking like to get down to the Home Depot, that's a 10-minute drive.
Yeah.
And you're still the closest that they have.
the EMS system is set up a little differently. Like
It's set up-
it's based on your certificate of need.
Yeah.
You mentioned Chief Kelly mentioned CON. It's called Certificate of Need. So New York State Department of Health tells you where your response area is. So for the most part, yes, Penfield Ambulance is the closest to most parts of their district. There may be times where they're not, but because of the CON, they have to have first shot at it. So it's a struggle statewide. It's just, it's one of those things that it's health law, it doesn't make sense, it's not logical, it's legal, so it's.
So would the town have a say over if they did want to add a second site, where it would be located, or is that dictated by the state as well?
No, that'd be between the agency and, I don't think the state would really have much to do with that.
Okay.
But that'd be the agency and just looking for property, and, I'm sure the town would be willing to assist looking for empty property that would suit their needs.
And that's a good question. Dan, have you identified certain areas of the town that you'd like to?
So Reardon just texted me, actually. He had a family emergency, unfortunately. His son is ill. But, you know, he texted me and basically said our biggest needs for long-term planning is our increased call volume, our growing operation, and how to best manage and improve our response times, i.e. a substation or expanding our base or having a secondary ambulance base within the district. So they looked initially at utilizing space that's, what's the park now?
Channing Phil.
Thank you, Channing Filbert, thank you. I always want to call it linear. That's what it was when I grew up. So if I said linear, you guys all would have understood it anyways. That's fine, I appreciate it. There's a department or highway department or some kind of building down there. They looked at talking about expansion down there, putting a substation down there.
It's a former sewer treatment plant.
Is that where
It's
that
not the
building was?
easiest way to get in and out of.
It is not easy to get in and out of,
Especially in the wintertime, that's got some grade to it. And
especially with the 441 traffic.
twists and turns and trying to pull out on the.
So that was on the table. They talked about somewhere down the 441 corridor. I don't know. I don't speak on behalf of the ambulance space when it comes to their planning,
So question,
what they've looked at as a board.
is it more complicated to have a second facility than expand the first one? From the logistics and how you manage the whole thing? And that's
So-
a naive question, because I have no idea how you do that.
No, Harold, it's a great question, but I'm not a member of the board anymore in Penfield, so I don't speak on behalf of
Well, that's
Penfield
okay.
Ambulance. I'm speaking as just a volunteer.
That's fine.
But I'll tell you from my standpoint, from my perspective, response times and how better to serve the community as a whole would have a secondary station
Would be best.
somewhere where our call volume is heavy, which would be
Okay.
down
Okay.
that
That
way,
makes sense.
somewhere. Now, I can't tell you any other logistics about it, yeah.
You actually look at some EMS agencies on the west side of the county,
Mhm.
Gates and Greece, and they've expanded into multiple stations.
Mhm.
So, and there's actually recent news, I've heard the CHS
Yes.
Healthcare, they're now
Merging
taking over
into
Greece, so
Greece.
they're merging with Greece, so they're becoming a very large conglomerate for EMS services, and that's kind of the trend. So whether or not that comes to the east side of the county, I can't say, I'm just observing what's going on in other areas of Monroe County.
So I'll tell you, in an EMS standpoint though, we talked about CONs. East Rochester is operated now by AMR, by a commercial EMS agency. So that is a little different too. So they're not a village-operated, volunteer-based agency anymore. They're now operated by a for-profit EMS agency. We end up covering a lot of calls into East Rochester as well because they only run one ambulance at a time. And then Webster is broken up into two different EMS agencies, so that makes it even more complicated. And then you look at Harrington, where in the location of where their base is, compared to where that 250 corridor where Penfield intersects right in there, right past Target and those buildings. There's a lot of EMS calls in there, but Harrington's base is located very far away. So we end up taking a lot of calls in that area as well. And that's just the way it is right now.
Have you guys looked at throwing a couple of bays up at the fire station Four Corners? I mean, that seems like that would be the...
I don't know
Lot
if
of
Dan
space.
actually talked to you guys about that or not.
Yeah,
I think he did approach
he
you.
did at one point. We actually have all those bays are filled at this point, other than the one end maintenance bay.
But you
That would be-
You could go into one of those parking lots. Those are...
What's
I
that?
mean, there's space in the parking lots you could expand into.
To expand the building?
Yeah.
There's, off to the, I guess it would be the the northeast corner, there's a fairly large parking lot out that way, but just off to the side of the building and to the front, it's pretty limited. To actually add on to that building, you would be using up. And the other thing you have to realize is our volunteers responding in need to park in those areas. The other parking is, you know, non-emergency meeting nights or public. I know the town does have part of that public parking lot out there. But that's out of pretty far to the northeast. The footprint our building currently stands on, we squeezed that in to that footprint 20 years ago when we built it. That's what we had to work with. And we did acquire that other property and stuff for the parking next door. But to add on to that building, there's not, that particular spot, there's not a lot of parking right there that would, plus we have the dentist office in that one corner, that's a private parking lot there, so there really isn't a lot of room to go directly off this current building. And then again, that would have to be worked out with the Board of Fire Commissioners, and you know, they own those buildings, and you know, that would have to be a deal struck with them. But there was talk, or you know, a little bit of between the chief officers and Dan quite a while ago about that option plus this treatment plan option. But
How about Harris Hill?
the park,
Yeah, seems like could be something there.
it's all town owned, yeah.
Do you have an idea what percentage you have, like a joint response with the ambulance corps? Is it's probably not,
We don't do, because I don't want to call it a duplication of services, but with the ambulance having paid personnel on duty, our response with them would be, I mean, we do respond with them on serious calls where manpower is needed, CPR,
Sure.
you know, people not breathing, where
MVAs.
people, right, MVAs. But for routine EMS runs, by the time volunteers come into the firehouse, get on the apparatus and go, the response time isn't much different than where they're coming from now. So it's basically a duplication of services, and we're putting all that equipment and risk on the road when it's really not needed. Their response times for where they have to go are good because they're manned and staffed in quarters where the fire departments are not.
So it's not really a great advantage to have you together as a common unit.
Not necessarily.
It might cause some problems in
Yeah,
terms
the biggest thing the ambulance would be benefiting from would be the location. They just need to get a location where
Right.
they're more to the populated area of town and where their call volume is. I think that's what that's probably what they're looking
That
at.
really is what they're looking at.
I mean, if you look at the fire districts, that's why we have multiple stations. For example, you know, we have a station up by Qualtrough and Browncroft, we have a station at the Four Corners, and then we have a station way out east, just for that reason, to give the citizens of the town the quickest station response for the area of needs. So depending on where the call is which stations will respond. And I, like Jeff mentioned, to the west side, a lot of your ambulances are going that way as well.
Are you seeing increased calls because of the age issue, or is it just general population growth?
So, I mean, didn't look at a snapshot of today's calls, but yes, we have an increased call volume from some of our long-term care facilities and senior living facilities. We have Atria, we have Grand V, we have the Legacy, we have, what's the new name of Heathwood, right?
Well,
We take a lot of calls up in Webster as well, though, at Baywind and
so,
Kid Castle.
I made the comment about us, so we came to an agreement with Dan, it's probably been 2 years now. They have Hillhaven up on Empire Boulevard, and they have Kid Castle and Baywinds off of Bay Road. Because of that, you know, because of the call volume and our ability to man it, and their ability to, you know, to do it as well. So, you know, we kind of came to an agreement that, you know, they were looking for, you know, some additional business, I guess you would say, or, you know, additional capacity to fill, and you know, there was some opportunity there. So they take priority 1s and 2s. You know, we go with them on 1s and 2s.
And we've taken 11 calls for service today alone so far for EMS in the town of Penfield.
So with the changing demographics that we looked at, I think that's going to be a kind of discussion point as far as recommendations for expansion. Now, you said on the fire department side, it's less of an issue because you see the building plan, so you could scale up equipment or change equipment based on a layout of a elder care facility or whatever. If it was something unique, you would tackle it then. But in your case, it's raw numbers, right? As people get older, the calls increase.
Yeah, That's definitely the case, and you can't predict EMS calls too. I mean, it's hard to say that we're busiest between 11 and 3.
No,
You really can't predict when emergencies are going to occur either.
I do want to ask a question, though, in terms of the what seemed like an increased proportion of multi-unit sort of residential structures in this town, whether they are the facilities for older people, you know, that seem to be going up, you know, increasingly in our town. The big bunch of apartments that went in behind Gentle's Market off of by Old Penfield Road there. The big development of apartment buildings up on Empire Boulevard by where Basil's or whatever it is, Mario's now is, all that kind of stuff. And some of the things that are proposed in terms of sort of mixed-use development that structures that we typically have not had a lot of those big sort of apartment type things here in Penfield. And it looks like with mixed use being, I think, more kind of more in vogue now, we may see more of that sort of stuff going in. How is that going to have an impact, you think, on your operations, your equipment, you know, fire in that kind of building versus fire in a single-family home? I mean, what do we need to be aware of, or what are you thinking about as you're thinking of the future that way?
Well, in the fire department end, obviously, with commercial and multi-resident buildings, apartments, or whatever, I mean, we, like the fire marshal would be in charge of all that, but we look for fire suppression systems, early notification for fires, occupancy, what's going to be in the building, is it going to be hazardous chemicals, hazardous materials with apartments above. Again, the fire marshal's office is, you know, keeps a close eye on that stuff, but that's the type of things that we would look for. And then again, access for our equipment. You know, the fire marshal's office knows the size of the apparatus, the turning radiuses and stuff like that, that's needed to access these buildings. So that would be the type of things that we look at or would be concerned with, just to make sure that we can get as close as possible. The water supply sources, hydrant locations, water main sizes, all of that, depending on the size of the buildings, would all come into play.
There's actually a perfect example of this in play right now with the first mixed-use district coming in, the old Wickham Farm. That's the Penfield Square project. The building department has been informed that we'll be receiving building plans within the next couple of weeks for the first building to go in there. And it's going to be a 4-story / 3-story unit with about 114 apartments in it. When we initially reviewed that project, I immediately saw the access around the building was not adequate, and I required them to widen the driveways. So we did get wider driveways there because of the apparatus that we already have in service that's going to respond to that facility. We also made sure that they're going to have the appropriate sprinkler systems and standpipe systems in place so that if there were to be a fire in the building, we can adequately fight that fire. And there's a lot of other details that go into that too, but just as an example, I mean, that's going on right now. So as these projects come up, we are making changes to them to suit what we currently have in place. So as far as increased call volume, who knows? I mean, this project, I did actually talk to Dan about this project as well, let him know it was coming in, because I see it honestly being more of an impact for them. The first building is going to be independent living, so it's going to be a senior community, no services, just basically apartments. But they do have plans in the future for other buildings that will have further services too. So the ambulance was aware of it. So honestly, I think they're the ones going to be more impacted by that. The fire department will probably see a few extra calls a year for an alarm here and there, maybe somebody burnt dinner or something like that. Hopefully nothing more major than that. But yeah, but we do look at the access and we do tailor it to what is currently in service and in use in that area. So,
can you reach the top of a 4-story building?
It depends. This one, potentially, it's going to kind of be built into a hill, but you know, it really depends. And that is something that we look at. I do know limitations of the aerial apparatus that we have in the town, both, you know, for the Penfield Fire District and actually all 3 of them. They're very similar, but sometimes you can't, and that's where you trigger standpipe operations. So, and that's where the code triggers standpipe operations. So that's why we're making sure they have adequate water supply. Actually made them put in a few extra fire hydrants around the property too. So we do take a look at those things, and we do make sure that they are adequate in the R2 code, and they will work for the way that the fire department responds in that area.
Dan, is there some sort of a ratio that emergency services use, ambulance in particular, of the number of residents in a town? You know, kind of what ratio of emergency personnel you need for what volume of residents in a town, what size population?
Don, I don't have a specific answer. I know that they've looked at the call volumes, they've mapped it out, where the call volume is, when the call volume seems to trend. It's very hard to predict when emergencies are gonna occur, where they're gonna occur, but they've looked at that and kind of staffed accordingly. But I don't know if Jeff has a better statistical or comprehensive answer.
Yeah, I think I know what you're trying to get at.
I do too, but
The school district will look at, okay, X number of houses, that
Right,
means X
yeah.
number of kids.
Yeah,
I don't
Yeah,
know.
there's really no algorithm that
There
I'm
isn't.
aware of for that.
Okay,
It's kind of, you know, it depends on what the facility is, the occupancy, who's using it. You know, the independent living facilities means they're gonna have kitchens, they're gonna have the ability to cook for themselves, which means in experience, it teaches me that there may be more bird food type alarms, things like that in that facility.
Now,
So-
conversely too, two of the elder care facilities within Penfield have contracts with commercial EMS agencies as well to provide EMS services for them. Like Penfield Place, which is down in Panorama, we don't go to a lot because they have a contract with Monroe Ambulance. So they provide EMS services typically for their residents. And that's actually a skilled nursing facility. I don't know how else, what you guys would describe it, but they need full-time care.
that is their occupancy classification, yeah.
That's what I was gonna ask, how does Monroe Ambulance or some for-profit or outside company fit into servicing? And I see, like,
I don't know.
would you, I mean, obviously they're out there, I mean, individual facilities, you know, you're saying hire them and utilize them.
Sure. Some of those elder care facilities contract with, two in particular, the one behind Penfield, or Penfield Place, and the one behind Target, which I'm drawing a blank with the name.
Aaron Manor.
Thank you. They also subcontract with a commercial EMS agency as well, so we don't respond to a lot of calls there. Now, however, we will if those commercial EMS agencies aren't available. Just like Brian said earlier, mutual aid is the term in which we use when we respond to another area's district or, you know, certificate of
Now, is
need.
that-
So if somebody wanted to build a facility for care like that, would the town ever require them to have a contract with a private EMS service?
No.
So what was the?
What's the advantage to it then?
Yeah, what was the
Keep costs down
rationale
for the
behind not using it?
residents, or-
My opinion on that
Guys?
would be, it's probably a good thing. When you look at these skilled facilities, they have a lot of healthcare issues.
Yeah.
So it's not taxing the Penfield ambulance,
Right,
so to
it's not
speak,
taxing
because
our
they do need,
resources.
and we have been on calls there for EMS actually, because when Monroe does come, or AMR or whoever, from a distance, and it's a particular type of call, they may call us to, because we can get there first at that point, because they're coming out of the city. But a lot of your calls from those facilities are more or less transport calls. They're not life-threatening situations. So if they were to call Penfield Ambulance for every one of those non-life-threatening situations, you guys would run way more calls, and their ambulances would be tied
So the
up
majority of those
on
calls-
those specific types of calls, taking the service away from the needs of the citizens in the town. So it's kind of a good thing, I think, that they do that, that they do contract with the.
I'm sure there's some cost benefit to
What's
it.
the
though.
I don't-
advantage of
The majority of them-
I don't know what the
Somebody needs to go to
advantage to the
hospital.
facility is, to be honest with you.
It
I
depends
don't
on-
know.
What might be built into their contract, I can't speak
Hey
to
guys,
those terms.
one conversation, just because the meeting's being recorded for people who aren't here. One at a time. Sorry.
All good conversation, just to make sure we pick it up so people aren't here can follow it later.
So he was asking about, you know, what might be the cost benefit to the facility, and we really don't know. I mean, I'm not a facility manager.
Well, it may be a
could
marketing tool.
There's
to get
gotta be
people-
some kind of cost
It's
benefit.
a marketing tool to get people to go there knowing that they have
Right.
immediate service if they need it. And they probably pay more. for
Having
it.
worked for commercial EMS agencies in the past, and servicing those contracts, I can tell you that, it is a dedicated service, regardless of what you might need. You don't have to rely on, and at the time, I'm talking 10, 15 years ago, since I've been in that side of the business. At that time, the volunteer EMS was not what it is today.
Correct.
It was not as robust as it was today. So at that point, there was definitely a benefit because you knew you were getting an ambulance, period, for whatever you needed, versus the volunteer, one agency would get toned out, they couldn't cover it, they'd go to somebody else, they couldn't cover it, they'd go to somebody else, and then it was just an increased response time. So as far as today, I don't know. There might be benefits in their individual contracts, but I can't speak on those terms.
I think Jeff hit the nail on the head, though. You're absolutely right, though. The EMS agencies as a whole, the whole business, and the nature of it, the culture of it has changed in the past 12 years that I've been a volunteer.
Very
Just like-
dramatically, too.
Very dramatically. That is an understatement of the century. I mean, we talked about our crew and our situations of what we staff now as an EMS agency for Penfield, how we staff 3 crews and 3 ambulances from 0600 to 2300, and how we staff 2 ambulances on the overnight. Back in the day, it was, we would subcontract 2 guys from Monroe. They'd ride an ambulance Monday through Friday from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. That was it. That's when I started.
So question, you guys talked about the consolidation of the EMS services on the west side, and how that's becoming, so, and it's maybe a tough question, but is there an advantage to them doing that? In other words, because they're sharing the resources so that they can limit the administration cost and across a broader.
Predominantly a monetary advantage to the agency.
And those are for-profit, is what you said? So they are not nonprofit, they're for-profit?
Not entirely.
Yeah.
Well, I heard the for-profit, that, I mean, as a citizen, that makes me a little bit nervous, because then I'm wondering what the quality of care I'm gonna get if they're trying to make a buck.
Yeah, you have 2 for-profit agencies in Monroe County. It's AMR and Monroe Ambulance. Everybody else is the not-for-profit volunteer type, but again, as Dan said, it's changed dramatically over the past several years. I mean, like I said, I got out of the EMS side about 10 years ago, and I don't even recognize it today from when I left. So
I'm just imagining if, based on what Dan's talked about, the administration of that amount of teams and making sure all the logistics are in place, that has to require additional effort versus what you did 10 years ago as well.
Sure.
And so who's doing that work?
So George, I'll simplify it all for you, though, or I'll try to answer it all very quickly for you. So obviously there's a cost savings involved in conglomerations. We are a non-for-profit organization, Penfield Ambulance. As the chief said too, he's seen, and the assistant chief, as Brian said, we've seen volunteerism decrease dramatically over the past 10, 12 years. Where we used to have 100 plus active volunteers, we're probably down to 20, 25. And out of those 20, 25, who knows who are really active and who ride on a regular basis. And you talked about who manages the operation. Well, it used to just be the volunteers. 12 years ago when I started, it was the volunteers. We had a volunteer board of directors, and we had somebody on the board who was in charge of operations, and somebody who took care of rig maintenance, and somebody who took care of the base maintenance. And you know what? Everybody kind of pitched in their own share, and the community kind of pulled together, and that's how it was. It's kind of held together with volunteerism and pride. And now we have a full-time operations manager, who's Dan Reardon, who couldn't be here unfortunately tonight. And we have a full-time ALS chief paramedic who oversees our care and training and all that kind of coordination for all our staff members, who is Dustin Mendel. So he oversees that aspect of it. Also, we have 2 paid administrators, basically. Well, 1 paid administrator, 1 paid manager, kind of, that oversee the operations of the base on a day-to-day basis. And we still have a board of directors, obviously, that's composed of volunteers that look at the bigger picture of the facility as a whole. But the whole nature of the business has changed dramatically. It really has.
Do you see that change, I mean, the assumption that change will continue in the direct?
So I can't speak from the fire side. I know you guys do a ton of training. I can speak only personally as a volunteer. The amount of pressure and responsibilities and time, energy, and effort it takes to maintain my certification as an EMT in New York State is a lot of work now for me. Somebody who has a family and a full-time job. It's a lot easier when you're getting paid to do it and it's your job, and the level and expectations from New York State continue to grow. I don't know if that answers your question,
Yeah,
but
it does.
you can only imagine where the trend tends to be.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering, even though the fire departments haven't seen it quite as dramatically yet, if that isn't an indication of the future of what you guys might be looking at some point, and if we're talking 10-year plans down the road,
Right.
then we should be, okay. Yes, you did answer the question. Thanks,
Yeah.
Dan.
Can you elaborate a little bit about the funding mechanisms you have to employ in order to operate the districts and the court?
Well, I'll tell you right now, a lot of times when we started 12 years ago, 10 years ago, we didn't bill. A lot of times. Heidi had a call at her house, she twisted her ankle, we came over, she called 911. I don't know, you were playing lacrosse, you were doing something. We come over, we'd evaluate her, we'd take a look at her, we might wrap her ankle for her, and if she didn't want to go to the hospital, all right, no problem. Have a great day. Thanks for being a Penfield, community resident. And we'd leave. But obviously, we progressed, and now, looking at a snapshot of today, we bill for most of our calls. We bill our insurance carriers, we are insurance carriers. So that's how we recoup our costs.
Okay.
It's very simple.
And you obtain donations as well?
We do.
Is there any taxing mechanism?
So there's minimal to no taxing mechanism. Do you know what the actual tax is, Rob? Or Jeff? What do you guys might know?
There is a
minimal
tax levy each year in the budget, and it's pretty much now at about 50,000.
Yep.
Yeah, and that has come down.
That I knew. I knew the total amount. I didn't know what it was per resident.
So when I started, maybe in 2010, I think it was closer to 150, maybe 100.
Mm-hmm.
But I think again, a lot has shifted in mindset. But at the time, the leadership of the ambulance corps was also trying to zero out the need from the tax levy. So over a 4 or 5 year period, I think they moved down to about 50,000, and that's sort of where it's plateaued now for the last 4 or 5 years.
I believe it is 50,000 flat. Exactly. That's all we draw from the town, and then that's it. We bill. We solicit donations.
How about the districts?
The fire district, the 5 commissioners of the fire district do set a tax levy through and submit it to the town. That's for the building facilities, the firefighting apparatus, maintenance type of stuff like that. We do not bill at all for any kind of services because of that. Our tax rates still are very low for our fire district comparatively to many fire districts in the county. The fire company now, which is basically the members of that operate the fire company, is the people that respond. We have a fund drive every year for our operating expenses, and they can be anything from office supplies, stationery supplies, to we do pay for uniforms, training, and so forth, and stuff like that. That comes out of the volunteer base, which is fund drive every year within the district. So it's kind of like 2 different entities: your fire company and your fire district. The fire district of the 5 commissioners maintain the equipment, the buildings, and so forth, and then the fire company basically operates that equipment and responds to the emergencies. The training, like you mentioned, the state is constantly adding mandatory training to the volunteer firefighters. Just the recruit training alone to get in is now up to 6 months, 2 nights a week for 6 months to go to the training facility to become a certified firefighter, to be able to fight interior fires. So 41 years ago when I got in, I think it was 39 hours. Now it's up to 180 or
Pushing 200.
yeah, pushing 200 and something. It's basically, like I said, for about a 6-month period, it's 2 nights a week out of somebody's and that's just for the training. At that point, they are still responding with us to emergencies and getting on the job training at the same time. So that's the biggest hurt in the volunteer fire service, is the time commitment for that.
So beyond the training requirements from New York State, what other changes do you guys see on a regular basis from them, either regulatory or whatever, that impact the services you provide?
Chief, before you answer that.
Yes.
George, I have some numbers for you, just in case you wonder, because you're kind of a number guy. It is 50,000 flat from the town, 1.9 million in third-party billing, and we roughly raise about $50,000 to $60,000 annually with our fund drive.
Is that 60,000 pretty consistent per year?
I did the fund drive a couple of years ago. Yeah,
What is the fund drive? Is that the mail?
yeah.
Yeah,
Ryan, the same for you?
we're structured very similarly. So the district side is your taxpayer-based funding. Like the chief said, I mean, we're proud to, we've got one of the lowest tax rates in the county for our fire service. Our ambulance, we run 2 ambulances, but we are volunteers, so we are not allowed to bill. And then, like the chief said, we've got a Firemen's Association, which is essentially the manpower that the district utilizes to operate the 3 stations and all the apparatus, and we do the same thing. We have a one-time year fund drive. It's a mailer, and we raise between that and you get some money from United Way and different entities. We're usually in the $90,000 a year range. But to the chief's point, the Fire Association buys uniforms and provides training. They pay for some of the training. There's a relationship between them and the district, so there's some apparatus and things like that that are purchased. There's a lot of things like that. A lot of that money goes back into the community in different ways.
I've got a question, I guess mostly, Dan, for you, but for anybody.
You're gonna hide underneath the table.
So you talked about how the senior living facilities, they have a disproportional number of calls relative to, the average, say, same number of people living not in senior facilities. So they put an added sort of a burden in a way on the services you offer. Do those facilities as a whole pay some sort of a fee to the ambulance corps, the town, to any entity?
Jim, Mark, can you answer that? They don't pay us a fee.
Yeah.
We're not contracted with them. That was one of the pros of some of these for-profit agencies.
Right, that they pay their own way, basically.
Yes.
Because what I'm thinking is, all right, so even if the individual's insurance is billed, it still puts a stress on the infrastructure of your organization that pushes you potentially over the top in terms of needing an additional piece of equipment, an additional paid person
Sure.
on the staff, that sort of stuff. So it's that the marginal cost is okay until you hit the point at which it's the nth person over the line, just like with a school where it's the nth child over the line.
Right.
We got to build the new school. So there is no financial structure by which you are reimbursed for this sort of disproportional burden.
They're assessed on the building. I don't believe in, obviously I don't want to speak on behalf of the assessor, but I don't think that they're assessed as a building any different that they're versus an apartment building versus a senior living facility. I don't believe there's any difference.
And then
between
what
those.
about the fact that some of these are nonprofit organizations as well? Some senior living facilities, and I don't know about some in Penfield, but I know like Episcopal Senior Living is coming in somewhere soon, and they are completely nonprofit. What do they pay to the town?
They pay they pay fire district fees, they pay any additional district charges. So they pay that, they pay a drainage district fee or something to that impact as far as tax base.
So there's no zoning laws, or there's nothing in place to say because it's an adult care facility or a senior living facility that there would be some extra tax paid towards fire or emergency?
Not in New York State. It's kind of like the old days in Florida when they were just building everywhere and everybody needed a new school. Florida had the ability, towns in Florida had the ability to charge the developers to build a new school or to take funds from them to have one built. It's not true in New York. You can't do it here. You're responsible for maintaining the education of the children in which the district is living. It's the same thing that they go through. They're responsible for maintaining the health of the people they're serving. So.
New York State health law says that anybody at any time that requires immediate emergency care shall have access to it regardless of your ability to pay. So, so that's what Penfield Ambulance provides for anybody within the town of Penfield. Doesn't matter if you're traveling from overseas or you're a resident. You get that same service because it's New York State law. So for the town or the ambulance to charge a facility just because of their facility, for an ambulance service, I don't think is legal. I'm not a lawyer, but there is no fees that I'm aware of. It's just billing the patients. If the facility wants to contract with a commercial agency like Monroe or AMR, then yeah, there's probably a fee associated with that, but that's their choice. If they didn't want to pay that fee, then they would fall back to Penfield Ambulance at, I believe, no charge.
Yeah, I know New York State also has a limit to the number of beds that are out there. You have to get approval to build beds from the state before you go ahead and do that. So it's not like everybody just runs out and says, hey, this is a great cost gaining operation, we're going to go ahead and do it. New York State issues you the number of beds you can build. So a lot of times we have people propose a project, they kind of get started, get a preliminary idea of it, then they got to go back and make sure they get the beds approved. And Penfield Place was one they started with their project. It kind of delayed for a bit of time. They made sure they had the beds approvals from the state before they could proceed with completing the project. So we're not seeing a glut of all of a sudden everybody says, hey, this is a great for-profit entity, let's build senior care facilities. There is a limit by the state for that, so it is regulated on that end of it. But we also don't get to decide whether they're coming or not, as we've all looked through zoning. If things are zoned for it, we don't choose whether McDonald's comes versus Burger King. That's not up to the town. We have no jurisdiction over that. The groups come to us. We don't propose any of the new development that's out there. That's not decided by the town. It's Burger King came to us and McDonald's didn't, or why is Wendy's across the street from something, why does Wegmans build next to Tops?
I mean, we can get a Chick-fil-A in Penfield, I'm all right with that.
Well, Henrietta's getting one, so.
Run it out there, guys.
It's getting a little closer, but again, we can't decide for Chick-fil-A to come to us. We can go out.
But to that point, I just one small clarification. I don't want to belabor it because it's not directly related to this, but is there any sort of guideline within the town for the proportion of nonprofit versus for-profit versus, because obviously if you have a whole town that has nothing but nonprofit organizations not contributing to the tax base, but to Chief David's point, you got to give everybody access to an ambulance and access to fires, and fire protection and stuff, but you have no tax base to cover it. That would be, obviously pretty crazy and a disservice to everybody. Is there some guideline that the town uses in terms of approving things and says, well, we need to kind of maintain a tax base of X?
It's actually a good question, but I was just reading a court case recently where the town of Canton is suing a church because they don't, the church is taking over a commercial property that is taxable. There's a law called the RLUIPA law, it's several years old now, it's a federal law. It allows for religious activities to take over commercial or residential property to accommodate their mission. So it's, I doubt they're going to win that case. And Penfield's experienced the same thing, as is every other town around us. Browncroft Corners Plaza, much of Browncroft Corners Plaza is not taxable now because it is owned by a church and the church is practicing its religion at that site. There are other uses within the plaza that are taxable because they're of a commercial nature and they generate a profit. The YMCA is not for profit. There's several out there. Any church, any group home, they're not for profit organizations. So the U of R, not for profit. So everywhere you see a urgent care facility or any kind of office building in the U of R, it's a not for profit organization. So you've got permitted uses, you've got uses that are not permitted. If they fall within permitted use section, they're able to be built. In some cases, there are arrangements where they all have to pay their sewer charges and their other district charges, but generally speaking, they're not paying the taxes that you and I would pay for our properties. They do provide services for the people in the community, though. So as a result, I don't think you find too many people that want the YMCA to go away. Because it provides a great service to the community. That's just the way life is in America. Really, when it comes down to it.
Unfortunately, we can't dictate. We've reached our quota of not-for-profit. Sorry.
You can't come in.
You're the next one, you can't come in. I mean, we can't discriminate against religion. We can't, Jim had shared the RLUIPA law. We can't say, well, we've got enough churches your church can't come in or your church can't come in. Unfortunately, that's against the law. We can't prohibit that, and they need to follow the process for application and site plan as anybody else. We just can't deny them based on, sorry, we've got enough non-for-profits in town right now. You're one too many.
And you don't want to. I mean, they provide a service to the community one way or another. We all benefit from whatever activity that they're generating. It's just that we do not get tax dollars for it, a lot of what they do.
So for as an example, the mixed use one that's going in now, that's for profit.
Half and half.
Some of it is, some of it is not.
So that's the question. So if we take a look at the current senior facilities in Penfield, how many of them are and how many of them aren't, that would give us an indication how it's trending as they're building the new ones.
Several of them are for profit, and several of them do pay taxes. There are a few that were developed several years ago that do not, but I'd say the majority of they're privately owned, and they are generating taxes.
Can I go back to Mark's point? I just wanted to clarify something with the state approving the number of beds. That's only for certain facilities. It's not all senior communities, if you will. So like the first building that's going in at Penfield Square is all independent living. There's no health care services being provided. So they could put up a 10-story, 900 whatever apartment unit that they want. As long as they feel like they could, well, as long as they get zoning, yeah. They could put as many units in there as zoning would allow.
Yeah, that's not a dedicated.
That's the state can't really say anything about it. So there's kind of like, when you talk about senior care and senior living, there's about 4 different classifications. You have the independent living, which is nothing more than an apartment that the renter is very specific on who they rent to, which is typically like a 55 or older crowd. Then you have a step up from that, which is assisted living, which again is predominantly just apartments with maybe some services, a dining service or something like that. But again, that's still not regulated by Department of Health. Then you have skilled nursing facility, which is regulated by Department of Health. Those are the beds that need to be approved. Those are the facilities that have to be approved because they provide actual healthcare nursing facilities. And then you kind of have a tag along to that, which is memory care, which is a little bit of a step up. They're dealt with a little differently because they require different types of securing mechanisms to protect the residents of those facilities. So you kind of have 4 different levels. 2 of them, there is no state regulation. 2 of them, there are. So just wanted to make that point clear.
And you do make a good point about senior, when you talk about seniors, you're talking about people 55 and older. 55 is pretty young. I kind of remember it a long time ago.
I was going to say, I'm looking at that in the rearview mirror myself.
So, 55 is not an old age, but it is considered to be a senior in New York State.
I'll tell you, the majority of the patients that I take in are not 55, 65, or even 75.
That's even young in many cases.
Yeah, that is young.
So it would be safe to say that if we were talked about well, I won't say a burden, but an increase in calls would be more for the skilled care where you know you're getting to the much older end of the spectrum.
So Ruben texted me back too. He says our call volume's edging closer to 4,300 this year. It's looking to be like trending. So, I mean, last year we set a record on our call volume. This year we're looking to set a record on our call volume. Yeah.
Yeah, it's to your point there, the skilled nursing and higher levels of care are typically the ones that non-scientifically, no studies done, just our experience tells us that yes, those skilled nursing facilities such as, a perfect example is the Grand V facility. You have Grand V in Villagewood.
Yeah.
Grand V has skilled nursing and memory care in it. Yeah. Villagewood is assisted living. They are 2 separate facilities. The ambulance responds much more often to Grand V than it does Villagewood. Yeah. So obviously it's not a true study, it's not scientific or anything, it's just experience, but the level of care, the higher level of care the person needs, the more likely are they're going to need continued care at a hospital or something. So yeah, the call volume is more towards the skilled nursing side.
Well, and I'm sure that with a little bit of research on our part, there are data crunch.
I'm sure there is somewhere,
we can get access to that would be beneficial in kind of that. So I don't need to dive into it.
No. But I mean, an anecdotal story is, I mean, I go to Granby all the time, almost primarily to the memory care unit. I know exactly which door to pull in. I wait for the staff member to buzz the door because they have security protocols. We got a call to Granby and it was the other door, and I'm like, I got this address right? It's like I've never been to this side. Am I in the right spot? So,
Talked a lot about senior care. How about, particularly during the summertime when you got all these youth programs going on, baseball,
so that's a hard thing too, because we have dedicated an ambulance at certain times to sporting events. You know, we have homecoming, we have football games going on at the high school, we have, you know, varsity sports playing in the football or at the high school, and we dedicate a rig to go over there. A lot of times that's our volunteers though that are spending their Saturday or their Friday night on an ambulance at the game, dedicating their time to be there. And that's something that just we have arranged in good faith with the town to try to support some of those activities. Whether it's jazz band at the park over here, or it's a varsity level sport or JV level sport at the high school. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does, and obviously, you know, it's a situation where you have a lot of people coming to one place and congregating. You may have problems.
But a lot of times, and I'll just tell you from a logistics standpoint, they put up a sign-up sheet basically and say, hey, we have these town events coming up. They put it by the operations manager door. Can we get some volunteers to staff a rig for this night? Just like, I mean, you guys kind of draw upon your volunteer staff at the fire for any big events too, that you guys have open houses,
Yeah, but with a dwindling number of 20.
DWI events.
I mean, you told us you had you're down to 20 or so. I mean, that spreads them pretty thin if you've got multiple events.
It does.
And have you had to in the past, or would you ever use paid staff to cover any of those?
I can't answer that question. I don't know if they have or have not. I mean, it's kind of like a good faith. We do blood pressure clinics all the time as well throughout the community, not just in Penfield, but it's not a part of Webster as well. And that's mostly the volunteers, those 20, 25 core people who are still actively participating, some in their 60s, and, you know, just die-hard EMS. They've been doing it all their life, and they're still giving back to their core in the community. But no, I don't know if they would pay a crew to be at the homecoming game or a DWI drill at the high school.
So, like, for me, I did a 4-on-4 tournament out back. I ran it through the Penfield Recreation, and we called them just to let them know that the event was going on. Very sweet, very kind. They just put it down, took the notes, and then obviously, if there's calls, those are the priorities. But
that's a good
so we just let them know. On the flip side, there's days where we have a lacrosse tournament at the town of Penfield, at the high school, and I do believe there is a rig that is up there, and on occasion we'll take the money from that tournament and donate it to these fellas, because
well, that's a very good point, Heidi. You forget about all the other events, such as 5K events where they, you know, they're running through the streets of Penfield, or biking events where you have 150 bikers going through the town. We always make sure that they're notified, or have the applicants notify them to make sure that they know this event's going to take place, and at least they're prepared for the idea of having to go out if they need to do that.
So Jim, I was joking with Heidi, but I mean the truth is, and I don't mean to be rude to you guys get all the money. We get all the calls. And that seems to be the swing. I mean, it's a drop in the bucket, $50,000 from the town in which Penfield Ambulance receives. You look at your tax bill, I don't know what each Penfield resident is taxed, but I know it's a lot higher than $1.32, which is what roughly the EMS agency gets from each taxpayer.
and youth events are going up.
What is it, $1?
I think fire taxes are like 80-some cents per thousand.
Per thousand assessed, right, our total.
Yeah.
It's like $1.32.
Right.
I was gonna say, because my fire tax, my house is little, and not paid on.
Good discussion. Any other questions for our guest tonight? where they leave, many thanks for coming. Appreciate all of you coming out. Obviously dedicating your time for fire service, but coming and talking to the group.
Because you have so much free time.
But it is very helpful, and I think it's been beneficial for me, and I'm sure as well as for the committee, as we look at, you know, projecting things that the town is going to continue to grow. You know, that's a fact. You know, there is going to be continued demand for services, so how do we project that? How do you plan ahead for that? So,
Did you say 82 cents for every $1,000? Or $10,000?
Per thousand.
Per thousand.
Assessed.
So, question, how does the $1.42 get assigned to the tax bill?
I believe it's a line item.
Yeah,
It's a line item in the town
so I guess
budget.
what I'm trying to understand is, why isn't it $1.82?
It's whatever $50,000 divided by all the taxpayers or something. Some mathematical equation.
That gets back to what you said, it was ramped down and it's now steady at 50,000.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
But it's being ramped out internally though, isn't it? I mean, I think the board of directors.
I haven't been on the board in
Maybe
years.
was bringing it
Yeah,
down?
I am not aware of any conversations that have been asked
What's
by ambulance to the
Fine.
town to look at that differently. But again, I mean, there's a unique structure in place between fire, ambulance in New York State and municipality. I mean, with the exception of cities and law enforcement, it's not for profit, it's volunteer, no matter where you go in New York State. So, and I don't know what barriers there are between starting a town-wide EMS or anything else. I know that, I think Brian, you kind of addressed it earlier, volunteer fire departments cannot bill for service if they have ambulance. So Penfield Ambulance can bill because they're not with a fire department. So even the certificate of need, like David said, I mean, it's complicated to keep track of where the lines are, where the closest ambulances are, and a lot of it is heavily regulated and imposed upon the law enforcement and EMS and fire. So I guess if you kind of keep looking about what options there may be to, you know, I mean, yes, I guess in theory the town could raise whatever the levy is for the ambulance base, but at the same time, now you're starting to look at a full-fledged department of the town of Penfield as an EMS corps, and I'm not sure that that's even a viable option.
I don't think Penfield Ambulance wants to become.
And I don't think they'd want it, and I don't think the tax burden could bear it right now, to be honest with you. I mean, at the same time, the bill pay has gone like this.
Right.
So while the town has gone down maybe 100,000, bill pay's gone up probably over $1 million.
But operating expense has gone up.
Exactly. So, and
10
that,
times.
again, because volunteerism has gone down, and so
Right.
there's a lot of different, you know, charts going in different directions right now, and it's very complex, I think, when you start to add in all the different levels and layers of the services, so.
Yeah, charging for ambulance service is not so much volunteer versus paid.
Right.
It's how much tax money is funding that service. So that's why the fire district in West Webster runs the ambulance. They levy a tax every year. They cannot also bill on top of that tax levy. So that's why they can't bill, and that's why a lot of fire department ambulances can't. That's why Penfield Ambulance can, because they don't have that higher tax levy. And as Rob said, if the town were to take over the ambulance, it'd be astronomical. I mean, to be able to
Millions.
to pull in $2 million a year or more
Yeah.
to adequately staff that, I mean, that's a pretty big jump from $50,000. So that would be a pretty good hit to the town.
So one last question. So let's say that,
Yes, I'd like a fly car. Is that an option?
no, if Penfield Ambulance builds another facility, another garage, in some other location in the town to improve, you know, everything you said, how does that get paid for? Do you fundraise for that privately? Is that something that town would participate in?
Jeff, can I phone a friend?
How would that happen?
I'm phoning you.
Me?
Sure. Anybody.
Actually, I don't
Rob?
know, that's a great question, I don't know the answer to that, so that's something that I'd have to
We
research.
have reserves. We're a not-for-profit organization, we have reserves. I'm sure that they would utilize some of their cash reserves to pay for
Okay.
that facility.
But you would privately fundraise again to try and raise the funds to build the
Likely, yes.
facility?
I'm sure they would.
So you would do something like a building fund or a,
I'm sure they would.
okay, all right, that makes sense.
For projects, big projects like that.
We haven't had one, so it's hard to say.
Okay.
Are like naming rights ever sold Like I saw the new Pittsford Y. I don't remember the family. They donated several $1 million, and now their name's going on the front. I mean, does that ever get offered up to help offset the cost of big projects like this?
If there's somebody here who's a millionaire and wants to offer Penfield ambulance a couple million, I'll put your name all over the next base. Station 2, here you come. It's all yours.
We haven't had that many new buildings like that, public buildings like that, where, you know, it's come up as an issue. But I think, again, it does go back to the community support, and they would have to recognize the need for it. I don't think if anybody's ever experienced having to have the ambulance corps come to their home, you understand the need for it. So I think that if they actually did undertake a funding mechanism like that, it would probably get support in getting it.
And I think that's all stuff, looking at the comprehensive plan and recommendations to making sure that it's staffed and housed and everything else. I mean, those are functions to look to the town as we move forward, that make sure we support that. And
well, then the other recommendation,
my recommendation
would be to help find them a spot that they're
I was just going to
supportive.
say that town land, if the town and the ambulance corps can work together to establish some area where it would be mutual beneficial to the town residents and the corps. But yeah, that's how the town can help. That's what we could look at long term.
Well, that would be something that we would have to do. Yeah. Eventually, we're going to have to get together and start looking at those issues.
Any last comments, questions from the group? Again, many thanks to Jeff, Gary, Brian, Daniel.
And thanks for all you do, really.
For coming, yeah, first off, thanks for all you do, and thanks for coming tonight.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Harold. You dismissed me.
So a little housekeeping on our end. We have no meeting on April 16th. So that's break week, so I think a lot of people will be out of town, so we'll have that off. So our next meeting of this group is May 7th. We're working on getting a special guest for that night. And we've still got some ideas of who we're going to bring in and several others. So if you have other ideas, please let us know, but we'll get people scheduled for that for May 7th. And I think as Jim has alluded to earlier, as the weather starts to get nicer, I think we'll start to kind of get out and look at areas of the town and get out of this room and take a field trip and go look at some spots and drive around, and whether independently or as a group, we'll try to get out and about a little bit. So that's kind of our next plan or path going forward.
Great.
But again, thanks for coming tonight.
Yeah, thanks for the input.
Great discussion.